We have this from Timcast.com. EU approves carbon tax for individuals. Some officials warn the new CO2 taxes could be politically suicidal and spark widespread protests. Under the EU emissions trading system 2, ETS2, the new polluter pays taxes will be imposed on buildings and for transportation fuels as part of a plan to reduce Europe's greenhouse gases by 55% compared to 1990 levels by the year 2030. The carbon tax will impact gas, diesel, heating fuels like natural gas, making it more expensive for Europeans to travel and heat their homes. Now, we saw when France tried raising that petrol tax, and then they got the Yellow Jackets protest for like 2 years. I don't think this will go over well, but I will just stress to everyone who is American, if you do not stand up for yourself and for what you believe in, this is coming here next.
Well, there's actual conversations in the European Union right now warning about a yellow vest populist uprising because of how they're just bleeding the average person there. And I literally wrote carbon tax because I was going to say that next without even knowing that you were pulling up the story because it was already in my mind. Another thing I wanted to bring up really quickly, Bill Gates also is an individual who promised to give the majority of his wealth away to charity. He has since then doubled his money. It's not a coincidence because he's launching a lot of scams. And when you look up the larger kind of philanthropy scene, when you look at a lot of these people who say that they give the most, usually those are some of the most ruthless, psychopathic business people that you could ever imagine that are milking the system, abusing the system, and this larger climate change Ponzi scheme is just a way to try to bleed out the people, take away more money from them, and to control them as a proxy social credit score system. There's a reason airlines started calculating your carbon credit score. How much carbon are you using here? There's a reason private businesses and banks started to calculate this on their own initiatives. It wasn't their own initiatives. It was centrally controlled and centrally pushed out there. And this is the slow creeping Chinese totalitarian society that they're going to be bringing in everywhere. Europe is just the beginning. They're going to be bringing it here to the United States eventually.
Canada is right lock in step with Europe. In Canada, they've actually floated, it's not being implemented or anything like that, but actually capping the number of miles that an individual may be able to travel. So essentially, if you drive for work and you want to go on vacation for summer holidays, well, guess what? You can't buy that plane ticket. You've already exceeded your mile quota. And they've even floated things like, oh, you could have cap and trade for individual miles. And oh, you have an electric vehicle. Well, now we can monitor who is going where and driving what. So they might actually be able to just press a button and stop your engine to ground you so that you don't go anywhere. This is terrifying, and it's being done in the name of compassion. And I think, you know what? I'm going to say this. If these policies take hold anywhere, it's not going to be Europe. It will be Canada.
Let me ask you, do you think maybe 10, 20 years you're driving in your Tesla and then you get a carbon, energy consumption warning and it slows you down and says, return home, you've consumed too much energy?
Yeah, and it's like you're in a arcade. If not, we're going to have a central bank digital currency that is deducted from your account that is linked to your otherwise carbon emission footprint unless you actually comply. That's where we're headed.
There are people trying to get that done for the Canadian trucker protests already. Anyway, electric vehicles they were trying to actually ground them, make them unable to move.
The state of California literally told people, stop charging your electric vehicles.
Yep.
Why? Because their power grid was going down. Why? Because they're going into this green energy revolution, which is, again, a larger carbon tax, a larger social credit score system.
And I'm glad you mentioned California because here's how the global cascade works on any of these climatist or even beyond climate policies. Europe does something boneheaded because they have their own insecurity complexes, apologizing for their own colonialist past or whatever is going on in Europe. California then copies that European policy. California then becomes competitively disadvantaged relative to other states. But California, which has the largest pension fund system in the country, CalPERS, uses its money to get BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard to then implement that through the private sector for the rest of the country. So that is the same cascade. We see that pattern time and again, which is why every American citizen should absolutely pay attention to what is happening in Western Europe, because it's going to find its way into the United States via the government of California, which then runs through the money of CalPERS, which then runs through the money that streams into the private sector of the United States. That's just the loop. It's sort of the unidentified invisible road of social policy from Europe into the.
I'm glad you mentioned stuff like that because those ESG scores. I mean, people start to wonder, why is Disney going so woke when their movies keep bombing? Well, it's exactly because of those investors that are looking specifically for companies that are pushing these, and it's not for financial gain. because clearly these companies aren't making money. It is actually an ideological push. And I think you're wrong if you believe that, money is the ultimate mover and maker right now, because there are people who are willing to lose a lot of money in order to push this agenda.
Which is why I'm also more optimistic on market solutions than I am on government solutions, by the way.
Amen.
Do you guys, I don't know if we haven't talked about this off air, but if you know what Strive, want to know what Strive, or does that mean anything?
A little bit. Yeah.
So my whole view is, look, so just for people who aren't aware about what's going on with the BlackRock problem, all right? You got 3 asset managers. They manage over $20 trillion. Okay, that's BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. That is, by the way, the largest private sector aggregation of capital in human history. I've actually started studying this going all the way back to the Dutch East India Company and beyond. This is the most powerful aggregation of corporate capital in human history. But they're using the money of those everyday citizens to tell oil companies to drill for less oil, tech companies to adopt racial hiring systems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you ask most people in this country, actually I'll give a homework assignment to anyone watching this show, literally go ask your financial advisor, go ask the person who runs your 401k plan at work, was my money used to vote in favor of a racial equity audit at Apple or a emissions cap at Chevron? First thing they'll tell you is they don't know, because they probably don't. Tell them to find out, and you're almost certain to find out the answer was directly or indirectly yes. Once you know that, you got to recognize it is your own money that is actually being used to vote for the very policies that we're sitting here complaining about. I bet probably directly or indirectly, I would be willing to bet that most of the 3 of you, if not all 3 of you, had your own investment accounts in some way, directly or indirectly voting for those policies. Once people wake up to that reality, you can move your own money in a way that at least gets much further than the government's going to get to in the next 24 months.
I made
Real
sure
quick,
mine is it, by the way.
Right. But so break this down for us. How would your money fall into the hands of those companies?
Yeah, so it's like a game of Plinko. You've seen The Price is Right? You know that game that you drop the Plinko chip?
Yeah.
You don't know
Fun
where
game.
it lands? Yeah, it's a pretty good game. So there's a bunch of intermediaries. So let's say, I'll give you a couple different cascades. Let's say you are working at a company, you put your money in a 401k account because you put that away. There's a tax advantage associated with doing so, whatever. Well, that's invested in index funds. You don't know who those index funds are because you have only a menu that your 401k plan administrator picks. Well, those index funds tend to be provided by the 3 largest asset managers: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Invesco, by the way, is number 4. They're not much better in this metric. Now, what do? They use that money to buy shares in publicly traded companies across the American economy. That's what an index fund is. You own the index. Now, with that comes not only a financial entitlement, which is the right to receive the profits and dividends, that's what you get if you own a share of a company, but also the right to vote. Because if you're a shareholder in this company, you have a right to actually say who runs the company, how much they're paid, and so on. However, that voting power rests with the index fund manager, the BlackRock, the Vanguard of the world. And what they're doing now is they're using that share to not vote for what actually advances the financial interests of the person in that 401k account, but to implement someone else's political agenda. Who's that someone else? Actually, turns out it's CalPERS. It's California's pension fund system. That's the state of New York's pension fund system, who've explicitly, starting when Trump pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, this is about 4 years ago, they said that, well, look, if the government isn't going to address climate change or racial injustice, then we in the private sector have to do it instead. So we, California, and by the way, Norway or whoever else will do the same thing, we're going to pull our money from you, BlackRock or Vanguard, unless you use everyone else's money that you manage to vote this agenda in place. And so they drag everyone else along for the ride because they know that mom and pop working with their 401k account ain't going to pay attention. They don't know what's going on. So it was by design that's actually what's implementing this agenda, where if you put it in the ballot box, that same mom and pop would say, hell no. If you ask them, do you want your money to be used to implement that same climate agenda or racial equity agenda, they will still say hell no. But little do they know that their hard-earned dollars that they banked away in that 401k account was indeed the very weapon that was used to implement that agenda in the first place.
And it's not just individuals, it's also states, it's also countries entirely just giving all of their money to these institutions and not even knowing that they're doing so. And I believe it was West Virginia and Florida are the only states that kind of moved out of it, away from the ESG score, which I think is worth noting here, because there is a way, if people spread this information enough, there is a way to move away from the system that we are incentivizing and giving money to, which is absolutely crazy, and I think we should stop immediately doing so.
I don't mean to plug my own stuff or whatever, but just factually speaking, I didn't think I was going to start another business. I thought I was done. I hung the jersey on business after biotech. The reason I came back to it is literally this is a problem that is begging to be solved through the market. So that is literally why I started Strive, which is to be a voice in the market that uses shareholder power that tells these companies to knock it off with the politics and to focus exclusively on making excellent products and services to make money and to do it without having to apologize for it. And the irony is, like, back in 1990, you would have said, this is banal. This is the most boring thing you possibly could do. Yet today, there's no other major firm I'm aware of that's actually started doing it. And you know what's funny is there's a million things I would have done differently. 3 months in, we crossed $500 million. It took J.P. Morgan, when they entered the ETF business, the exchange traded funded business, I'm told, over 2 years to cross $1 billion. It's like Upstart, we're 3 months in, we crossed $500 million because of the demand of the everyday citizen for this basic alternative and voice they bring to the table.
Can you break down in layman's terms what it is you do?
Yeah, so Strive is basically the new company I founded. It is competing directly with the likes of BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, offering index funds, ways to invest in the market, to own the companies in these underlying indices, but with a different mandate to the underlying companies. Using not a gentle ask, but using shareholder power to mandate these companies to focus exclusively on products and profits over politics and social agendas.
Have you talked with anyone in government in West Virginia or Florida about?
I've been talking to people across the states in the country, and it's been a wake up. It's been an exercise in waking these people up to what's happening in their own backyard. Now, the funny thing is, a lot of these folks are really happy in red states and otherwise to point the finger to BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard, and that's fine. When it's a lot harder for them to admit what's happening in their own backyard. We're talking about the deep state at the federal level. The deep state within the states is actually even more eye-opening. When you look at how Florida, or how even the state of Texas, forget blue states, how those states' pension funds, even for the proxies, the shareholder votes that they cast internally, they're every bit as bad as the ESG industrial complex at BlackRock. Racial equity audits at Amazon, civil rights representative on Facebook's board without reelecting Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen. They say they want to reelect them. They want to appoint a civil rights representative to Facebook's board. That's the state of Florida, right? And so I think that like a lot of conservatives, a lot of red states, they're really good at pointing out the problem in somebody else's yard, but not good enough at looking actually at the cesspool in even their own state governments in their own backyards. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is and I've talked, to all of these states and more, educating them about what's even happening in their own little fiefdom. And the more people get educated, the more it becomes difficult for them not to take action of some kind. I think that's what we're beginning to see.
If social media allows you to have a voice. And I absolutely agree with you. I do believe the market is a way better solution and should fix everything. But we have a lot of socialism when it comes to a lot of these government officials manipulating the market for their own personal benefit. But at the end of the day, for me personally, if you believe the government is going to solve any problem, you're either insane or delusional. So I'm with you. I think what you're doing is exciting. It sounds really awesome, to be honest with you. And I think if more people were aware, like, hey, I'm in a red state, but my retirement is going to the ESG, I think a lot of people would act on it immediately. I would. And I did personally, too. I have someone that handles my retirement, and I'm like, I don't want my money in any of this nonsense. And he handles it in a way where he makes sure it doesn't prioritize a lot of this bigger bullcrap.
We talked with the state treasurer from West Virginia, came on the show last week.
Yeah, Riley. Good guy.
You met him?
Oh, yeah. He's
awesome.
a friend. Yeah.
And he was telling, exactly.
We've
Awesome.
written together.
That's what I was going to ask you about. He talked about getting West Virginia out of all the ESG companies, saying we're not going to do contracts with them. These companies were saying we will not provide financing for the oil industry, for the coal industry, for fossil fuels. And that's West Virginia, strong point of West Virginia. So he said, then get out. We need to see more of that.
Here's this is going to be probably getting too boring and technical for you guys, but the thing I've learned is a lot of the state treasurers have been making a lot of noise. Turns out they don't have a ton of power. I hope I don't upset some of them by saying this, but I'm just going to call it like I see it. The real money is in the pension fund systems, right? So what the state treasurers have is like a pittance. They'll move a few $100 million, which sounds a lot on a FoxNews.com headline, but is actually a pittance compared to a $20 trillion problem where the tens or hundreds of billions are actually in the pension systems. And there you have politically insulated actors, right? You have actors who are designed to be not responsive to the will of the everyday citizens, that are through layers and layers of appointments, the people who sit on those bureaucratic bodies, that's really where the decisions get made. So, even that Florida decision, they pulled $2 billion from BlackRock or whatever, that was mostly cash and short-term, like fixed income, like lending instruments. Nothing to do with the equity problem, which is owning stocks and actually telling companies how to behave. That's in a different part of a state bureaucracy's apparatus. And it's, again, the same problem that we're talking about with the federal government, the whole FBI issue. It's the same issue here, too, where the people who we elect to run the government are really good at projecting to the public that they're able to exercise actual political power, when in fact that only deepens the problem because they're not even the ones who are exercising the real political power, which is a bureaucratic technocracy that sits beneath the level of detection. That's really where the meat is.
It absolutely is a political bureaucracy. And I know you're right that it's not left versus right, as simple as that. But once more, these structures that actually extend to things like pension funds, I don't think we can overlook that, yeah, these are all leftists, right? So the thing with leftist activists is that they are not just at their job. They are a leftist activist at their job. That is exactly why something like an ESG score even exists in the first place. And so what is frustrating to me with the right is that, okay, we are trying to further our agenda by saying, let's not be political a lot of the times. And a lot of time, that's all that the right is asking for, is just political neutrality. I would like to see the right fight back a little bit more and say, no, that's actually not enough, right? It's actually not just enough to say, oh, we're going to care about finances. And not that your firm should be in this, but individual companies, I would love to see more of them actually say, hang on, we're actually afraid to say something that's pro-abortion. We want to be pro-life because we know otherwise we're going to be upsetting the conservative consumer base just as much as we would be upsetting the left-wing, rabid, regressive consumer base. But unfortunately, the right is still not on the same cultural level that the left is in that regard.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.